The clink of silverware against porcelain felt like tiny hammers, chipping away at my resolve. "Really, Sarah, you must understand," Eleanor Blackwood purred, her smile a razor's edge. "Some families simply have a lineage, a history. You, dear, are a blank slate. A blank slate. That's how they always saw me. A nameless, faceless orphan plucked from obscurity, an inconvenience to their pristine genealogy. But what if they were wrong? What if the blank slate was just a canvas waiting for its true colors to emerge? A history deliberately obscured? Stay with me, like and subscribe, because this isn't just my story. It's a testament to the secrets that lie hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to unravel everything you thought you knew and redefine who you truly are. The roast beef, usually a comforting aroma, now tasted like ash in my mouth, each chew a bitter reminder of my place at this opulent table. My husband, Mark, sat beside me, his gaze fixed on his plate, a silent accomplice to his mother's casual cruelty. He offered no defense, no comforting glance, just the familiar suffocating silence that had become the third, unwelcome occupant of our marriage. Across the mahogany table, Robert Blackwood, my father-in-law, chuckled, a dry, rustling sound like dead leaves skittering across pavement. He raised his crystal glass, the ice cubes clinking like tiny chimes of judgment. "To family," he announced, his eyes sweeping over everyone but me, a deliberate exclusion, "and to the strength of our roots." My own roots, a tangled mess of foster homes and adoption papers, felt exposed, vulnerable, and utterly inadequate in their presence. They were the Blackwoods, a name synonymous with old money, impeccable breeding, and a lineage so long it was practically etched into the city's foundation. I was Sarah, the orphan, the charity case Mark had inexplicably chosen, a constant stain on their polished reputation. Every family dinner was a performance, a relentless reminder of my perceived inferiority. My hands, calloused from years of self-reliance, felt clumsy, holding the delicate silverware, a stark contrast to Eleanor's perfectly manicured nails. I wanted to scream, to shatter the oppressive politeness, to tell them exactly what I thought of their lineage, but years of conditioning had taught me to swallow the bitter pill of their disdain. I just nodded, forcing a vacant smile, a puppet on their strings, yearning for the moment I could escape. Later that evening, the house was quiet, suffocatingly so, amplifying the oppressive silence of my life. Mark had retreated to his study, the familiar click of his door a final, definitive dismissal. The silence amplified the echo of Eleanor's words, a blank slate. The phrase clung to me, a persistent wasp stinging at my composure, refusing to be swatted away. I needed to escape, even if only into the dust-laden, forgotten corners of our sprawling house. The attic, rarely used except for storing forgotten relics of the Blackwood dynasty, called to me with a strange, almost magnetic pull. It was a place where their history, their lineage was tangible, yet it was also a place where I felt most invisible, most myself, free from their judging eyes. I climbed the creaking stairs, each step a protest against the silence, the air growing heavy with the scent of aged wood and forgotten things, a melancholic perfume of the past. Dust motes danced in the single beam of moonlight filtering through a grimy window, illuminating stacks of antique furniture draped in white sheets, like silent ghosts, waiting to reveal their secrets. I had volunteered to sort through some old boxes, a task Eleanor had assigned with a thinly veiled smirk, knowing it was beneath her, a chore for the help. But for me, it was a sanctuary, a quiet rebellion against the pristine, suffocating order of their lives. I moved slowly, running my hand over the rough-hewn floorboards, the accumulated grime of decades clinging to my fingertips, a physical connection to the forgotten. My mind drifted, replaying Eleanor's condescending remarks, the way Robert had subtly steered the conversation away from anything that might remotely involve my past, Mark's practiced indifference that felt like a betrayal. It was a well-rehearsed symphony of exclusion, playing on repeat in my mind. Suddenly, my foot caught on something, not a loose nail, but a slight give in the floorboard itself, a subtle dip that hinted at something more. I knelt, brushing away a thick layer of dust, and noticed a faint seam, almost imperceptible, where two boards met imperfectly, a secret crack in their perfect world. My fingers traced the line, a small, almost invisible gap. Curiosity, a rare spark in the dull embers of my existence, ignited into a small flame. I pressed harder, testing the resistance. With a soft groan, the section of the floorboard lifted slightly, revealing a small, dark cavity beneath. My heart gave a little lurch, a sudden, unexpected jolt of adrenaline. It was a hidden compartment, something out of an old mystery novel, a secret waiting to be unearthed. My hand trembled as I reached into the cool, musty darkness, a shiver running up my arm. My fingers brushed against something hard and metallic, cold against my skin. I pulled it out carefully, my eyes adjusting to the dim light. It was a small, tarnished metal box, no bigger than a shoebox, its surface etched with swirling, almost indecipherable patterns, worn smooth by time. It felt surprisingly heavy, as if filled with untold stories. A strange premonition, a flutter of unease mixed with an exhilarating sense of forbidden discovery, washed over me, making my scalp prickle. I carried the box to the grimy window, where the moonlight offered a clearer view, a spotlight on my unfolding destiny. The latch was stiff, rusted shut, but with a determined twist, it gave way with a faint click that echoed loudly in the stillness. I held my breath, the scent of old paper and something vaguely floral wafting out, a forgotten perfume. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, were 3 items, each one a silent question. The first was a yellowed piece of paper, folded precisely, as if once treasured. As I unfolded it, my breath hitched, caught in my throat. It was a birth certificate, but the name printed boldly at the top wasn't Sarah. It was Eleanor Vance, and the names listed as parents, Arthur and Lillian Vance, were utterly unfamiliar, foreign sounds to my ears. My own adoption papers, sparse and vague, listed me as baby Jane Doe, found on the steps of St. Jude's orphanage, a stark, lonely beginning. A cold dread seeped into my veins, quickly replaced by a hot wave of confusion, then a desperate, irrational hope. Eleanor Vance? Who was that? And why was her birth certificate a document of such fundamental identity in a hidden box in the Blackwood attic? My eyes scanned further down the document. Date of birth, October 12th, 1990. That was my birthday. The same day, the same year. My head spun, a disorienting whirl of possibilities. This couldn't be a coincidence, but it made no sense. I was Sarah, the orphan. This was someone else, someone with parents, a name, a lineage, a history I had never known. Next to the certificate lay a small, tarnished silver locket. It was simple, unadorned, but felt heavy with unspoken stories, a relic of a life unknown. I unlatched it, my fingers clumsy with a nervous energy that made them tremble. Inside, 2 tiny faded portraits. One, a man with kind eyes and a gentle smile that seemed to reach out from the past. The other, a woman with striking intelligent eyes, holding a baby wrapped in a soft blanket. The baby's face was blurred, indistinct, but even in the dim light a profound sense of familiarity bloomed in my chest, a recognition that defied logic. It was an unsettling sensation, like seeing a reflection in a distorted mirror, a half-remembered dream. The woman in the locket, her features softened by time, bore a haunting resemblance to someone I couldn't quite place, a shadow at the edge of my memory. A tremor ran through me. This wasn't just a random box. This was personal. This was connected to me, irrevocably. I picked up the last item, a faded photograph, larger than the locket portraits, but clearly of the same woman, this time standing in front of a grand, ivy-covered mansion. She was smiling, holding a baby, the same baby, perhaps, the one in the locket. A profound sense of displacement washed over me, a feeling of being unmoored from my entire reality. My entire life, I had accepted my story as an orphan, a child without a past, without a family tree, a solitary leaf adrift. And now, this. A hidden birth certificate, a different name, different parents, a locket, a photograph. It was a jigsaw puzzle with pieces that didn't fit, a narrative shattered. My mind raced, trying to reconcile the image of a child, born into what looked like immense privilege, with the cold reality of my orphanage crib, the stark, unyielding truth of my upbringing. Eleanor Blackwood's words echoed, a blank slate. Was this what she truly meant? That my true history was deliberately erased, meticulously hidden from me? My gaze fell back to the birth certificate, specifically to the place of birth listed, St. Augustine's Private Hospital. The name hit me with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. St. Augustine's. It wasn't just any hospital. It was the hospital, an exclusive, legendary institution known only to the city's oldest and wealthiest families. A place synonymous with prestige, power, and generations of inherited privilege. A name whispered with reverence in the Blackwoods' own drawing rooms. My foster parents had barely afforded the local clinic for a checkup, let alone a private room in such an establishment. The idea that I could have been born there, that my earliest breath was taken in such hallowed halls, was utterly unthinkable. A cruel, impossible joke. The disconnect was jarring. A gaping chasm between the life I knew and the life hinted at in this dusty, forgotten box. Who was Eleanor Vance, and what did her existence mean for Sarah, the orphan, whose entire identity was now hanging by a fragile thread? The questions swirled in my mind, a tempest of confusion and burgeoning dread, promising to consume me. The birth certificate, clutched in my trembling hand, felt impossibly heavy, a weight of a life unknown, a past deliberately buried, and a future suddenly, terrifyingly uncertain. My hands shook so violently the paper rattled. This single document had just rewritten my entire existence, shattering the narrative I had always accepted, and I had a horrifying feeling the Blackwoods knew exactly why. The yellowed birth certificate, clutched in my trembling hand, felt impossibly heavy. Eleanor Vance. That name, so foreign, yet somehow echoing a distant, forgotten part of me, pulsed with an unsettling energy. The hospital listed St. Jude's Private was a place of legend in our city, whispered about only among the truly elite. It was a stark contrast to the sterile, impersonal government building where I'd been told I was born before being shuttled to the orphanage. My breath hitched. This wasn't just a different name. It was a different world, a different life. The faded photograph of the woman, her smile gentle as she cradled a baby who could have been me, and the ornate locket, cool against my palm, were tangible fragments of a past I didn't know I had. A cold dread, mixed with a fragile, dangerous hope, began to seep into my bones. I tucked the box back into its hidden compartment, the floorboard settling with a soft click, as if sealing away a forbidden secret. My mind raced, a whirlwind of questions. Who was Eleanor Vance? Who were these parents? And why had I, Sarah Miller, an orphan raised in a system, ended up so far removed from this apparent beginning? My years of living under the Blackwoods' dismissive gaze, enduring their subtle jabs about my lack of lineage, felt suddenly, sickeningly deliberate. I had to know. I had to find answers. The following days were a blur of forced normalcy and covert investigation. While Mark was at work and his parents were at their endless charity galas or golf games, I retreated to the small study, its heavy oak door a barrier against their world. My laptop became my portal. I started with St. Jude's Private Hospital. A quick search confirmed its reputation, a bastion of wealth and exclusivity, its maternity ward reserved for the city's oldest and most influential families. No public records of births from decades ago were easily accessible, of course, but the name Eleanor Vance stuck in my mind. I tried various spellings, cross-referencing with local obituaries, old society pages, anything that might yield a clue. Nothing immediately concrete for Eleanor Vance herself, but a powerful, recurring name emerged: the Vance family. They were everywhere. Philanthropists, industrialists, pillars of the community for generations. Their name appeared on university buildings, art galleries, and even the city's largest park. The sheer scale of their influence was staggering. It felt like trying to grasp smoke. My stomach clenched. Could I, Sarah Miller, the orphan who sewed her own dresses because new clothes were a luxury, possibly be connected to such a dynasty? The idea was absurd, yet the birth certificate was undeniably real. Dinner that evening was a particularly painful affair. Robert, my father-in-law, dissected the latest stock market trends with Mark, barely acknowledging my presence. Eleanor, my mother-in-law, scrutinized my simple dress. "Such a practical choice, dear," she purred, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. So unlike the Blackwood women, who understand the importance of presentation. Her words, usually just a dull ache, now felt like tiny sharp needles. Was this disdain a weapon? A way to keep me feeling small, insignificant, to prevent me from ever looking beyond the carefully constructed narrative of my past? Mark, as always, remained silent, his gaze fixed on his plate, a wall of indifference between us. I wanted to scream, to ask him about my adoption, about his family's history, but the words stuck in my throat. He had always been distant, but lately his withdrawal was palpable, almost a physical barrier. He seemed to shrink away whenever I brought up anything personal, especially about my past. I continued my research, delving deeper into the Vance family. I found a digitized archive of old newspaper clippings, and then, there it was, an article from nearly 3 decades ago, a small piece tucked away in the society section, detailing the tragic disappearance of a newborn baby, Eleanor Vance, from St. Jude's private hospital. The date of birth on the article matched the date on my birth certificate. My hands started to shake, the keyboard clattering under my unsteady fingers. The article spoke of a distraught family, a massive search, and the eventual heartbreaking conclusion that the infant was likely kidnapped and lost forever. The Vance family, once so vibrant, had been shadowed by this tragedy for decades. A cold wave washed over me. The Blackwoods, my husband's family, were distant relations of this Vance family. I'd heard them speak of the Vance legacy with a reverence bordering on obsession, always lamenting the lack of a direct heir. They spoke of the lost Eleanor with a performative sorrow that now struck me as utterly false. My in-laws, who had looked down on me for years, were connected to the very family whose missing heiress I now suspected myself to be. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. The next day, the tension in the house was a suffocating blanket. Eleanor Blackwood's sneering comments felt sharper, her gaze more piercing. Robert's politeness seemed strained, his eyes darting to me more frequently than usual. I felt like a bug under a magnifying glass. Mark's silence was deafening. He spent more time in his study, the door often closed, the faint murmur of his voice through the wood a constant, unsettling presence. That evening, I was heading to the kitchen for a glass of water, my mind still reeling from the Vance family revelation. As I passed Robert's study, the door was ajar, a sliver of light escaping into the dark hallway. I heard hushed voices, Robert and Eleanor. Their tones were low, urgent, laced with an anxiety I rarely heard from them. I froze, pressing myself against the wall, my heart hammering against my ribs. Can't risk any loose ends. Robert's voice, usually so booming, was barely a whisper. The Vance fortune is too significant. She's been asking too many questions about her past lately, Eleanor replied, her voice sharp, devoid of its usual saccharine sweetness. It's making me nervous. She's too close to understanding. My blood ran cold. Understanding what? My own past? The Vance fortune? The pieces, once scattered and confusing, were beginning to snap into place with terrifying precision. A horrifying possibility solidified in my mind, one that twisted my stomach into knots. I heard Robert sigh, a sound of grim finality. We need to accelerate the plan. Before she uncovers everything, the Vance estate will be ours, Eleanor, and we won't let anything or anyone stand in our way. The last words hung in the air, a chilling promise. My name wasn't mentioned, but I felt it, a cold, hard certainty. They were talking about me. The hushed voices from the study, loose end and Vance fortune, had twisted into a Gordian knot in my gut, tightening with every breath. Sleep had been a cruel mockery, each shadow in our bedroom morphing into Robert's cold stare, or Eleanor's saccharine smile. Mark, oblivious in his slumber beside me, felt like a stranger, his presence a stark reminder of my terrifying isolation. The morning brought no reprieve, only a deeper resolve. I needed answers, and I needed them now, before whatever plan they were concocting reached its chilling fruition. I feigned a headache, a common enough occurrence for me these days, to excuse myself from breakfast. The clinking of their silver against porcelain, the polite, clipped tones of their conversation, all felt like a performance I was no longer willing to applaud. As soon as I heard the front door click shut, signaling their departure for their morning routines, I was out of bed, my mind a whirlwind of possibilities. My first instinct was to revisit the attic, to scrutinize the contents of that metal box, to find anything I might have overlooked in my initial shock. The birth certificate, Eleanor Vance, the private hospital, they were the anchors of this terrifying new reality. Up in the dusty attic, the air was thick with forgotten memories and the scent of old wood. I pulled the box from its hiding place, my hands trembling as I lifted the lid. The yellowed paper felt fragile, almost crumbling under my touch. Eleanor Vance. My mind raced, trying to connect the dots, to find a logical explanation. Was it a coincidence? A shared name? But the locket, so distinct, and the photograph of the woman with the baby, a strange echo of my own face in miniature, screamed otherwise. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a secret, meticulously buried. I spent the next few hours hunched over my laptop, the screen a glowing portal into the past. I started with the name Eleanor Vance, cross-referencing it with the hospital on the birth certificate. The initial searches were frustratingly vague. No prominent Eleanor Vance born on that exact date in that specific hospital appeared in public records. It was as if her existence had been deliberately erased, but I persisted, narrowing my search, adding keywords like disappearance, family, heiress, and then a flicker of recognition. Not for Eleanor Vance, but for the hospital itself. It was notorious, an exclusive facility catering only to the city's oldest and wealthiest families. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was not the kind of place an orphan, abandoned at birth, would have been associated with. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I searched for the hospital's history, its connections, its notable patients, and that's when I found it. An archived article from a local society paper, decades old, detailing the tragic disappearance of an infant daughter from the immensely influential Vance family. Her name, Eleanor Vance. My breath hitched. The dates aligned almost perfectly. The article spoke of a massive, agonizing search, a family devastated, and a fortune left without a direct heir. The Vance family, a name I knew well. The Blackwoods, my in-laws, often spoke of them with a reverence bordering on obsession, admiring their old money, their sprawling estate, their philanthropic legacy. They were the epitome of everything the Blackwoods aspired to be. The irony, the sheer, crushing irony, was a physical blow. Dread began to coil in my stomach. The pieces, once disparate, were now beginning to click into place with terrifying precision. My orphan status, their constant belittling, the Vance fortune, whispered in the study. Could it be? Could I be that Eleanor Vance? The thought was so monumental, so utterly life-altering, it felt unreal. But the evidence, circumstantial as it was too compelling to ignore. The more I delved, the more inconsistencies I found in my own adoption story. The orphanage records I had been given years ago were surprisingly sparse. No details about my birth parents, no background beyond a generic abandoned at birth. It had always seemed odd, but I had attributed it to the nature of orphanages, to the passage of time. Now, it felt like a deliberate omission. I remembered an old newspaper clipping, found years ago in a dusty box of my own sparse belongings, about the orphanage's expansion. It mentioned a long-serving, dedicated employee named Agnes Miller, who had just retired around the time I would have been brought there. A slim lead, but a lead nonetheless. Finding Agnes Miller was harder than I anticipated. Her name was common, and privacy laws protected old employee records. But I was desperate. I cross-referenced her name with public directories, eventually finding an address listed in a quiet retirement community miles away. I knew I couldn't call. A phone call could be traced, could alert someone. This had to be personal. I had to see her face to face. The drive felt endless, my mind replaying every condescending remark from Eleanor Blackwood, every indifferent shrug from Mark. The disdain, the constant, subtle reminders of my place now felt less like casual snobbery and more like calculated psychological warfare. They wanted me to believe I was nothing, to ensure I would never look for anything more. The thought sent a cold shiver down my spine. Agnes Miller's small cottage was nestled among rose bushes, a quaint, peaceful scene that belied the storm raging within me. My heart pounded as I approached the door, rehearsing what I would say. How do you ask a stranger to confirm your deepest, most terrifying suspicions about your own identity? I knocked, the sound echoing unnaturally loud in the quiet afternoon. A frail, elderly woman with kind, tired eyes opened the door. Her face was a roadmap of wrinkles, but her gaze was sharp. "Can I help you, dear?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. I introduced myself, explaining I was researching my past, my adoption from the orphanage she had worked at. Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly, a flicker of something unreadable passing through them. She invited me in, her movements slow but deliberate. Inside, the air smelled of lavender and old books. We sat in her cozy living room, surrounded by framed photographs of children, her former charges. It was a comforting sight, a stark contrast to the coldness of the Blackwood mansion. I showed her the birth certificate, careful to keep my voice steady. "I was told I was adopted from your orphanage, but this doesn't match." Agnes took the paper, her fingers tracing the name Eleanor Vance, then the hospital. A profound sadness settled on her face. She looked at me, truly looked at me, and a strange mix of recognition and pity filled her eyes. "My dear," she began, her voice barely a whisper, "your file was unusual. Very sparse. We were told you were a Jane Doe, found abandoned. But there were instructions. Strict ones." My breath hitched. "Instructions? From whom?" She hesitated, her gaze drifting to a faded photograph of a group of children, one of them clutching a small, distinctively carved wooden locket. My locket, the one from the metal box, felt heavy in my pocket. "An anonymous donation," she continued, avoiding my gaze. "A very large one, with the express condition that your identity remain minimal. No inquiries, no deep dives into your past, just care." She paused, her eyes finally meeting mine. "And a locket, a very specific locket. We were told it was the only thing you had when you arrived." My hand instinctively went to my pocket, touching the cool metal of the locket. It was identical to the one in the photo. My mind reeled. An anonymous donation. Strict instructions to obscure my identity. It was all too clear. Someone had paid to make me disappear. "Agnes," I pressed, my voice hoarse, "do you remember anything else? Anyone who might have been interested in me? Or my background? Anyone who might have known about that donation?" She sighed, a long, weary sound, and looked away. "Years ago, after you had been placed with your adoptive family, there were inquiries. Not many, but I remember one family, very insistent. They wanted to know about children with no identifiable family. They mentioned being interested in supporting the orphanage, in a more hands-on way." Her eyes, full of a deep, unsettling regret, finally met mine. The Blackwood family. Agnes Miller's words echoed in my mind, a chilling whisper of confirmation. The Blackwood family had made inquiries about children with no identifiable family. It wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. The pieces, once disparate, now began to snap together with terrifying precision. My hand, still clutching the yellowed birth certificate, trembled. Eleanor Vance. That was the name on the certificate, a name that had haunted me since I found it. Eleanor Vance, born at that exclusive private hospital, the same hospital I'd researched, the one connected to the impossibly wealthy Vance family, the city's old money, the ones my mother-in-law Eleanor Blackwood spoke of with such reverence, almost envy. I locked myself in the small guest bathroom, the only place in the house I felt truly unseen. The air was thick with the scent of old potpourri, but it couldn't mask the metallic taste of fear in my mouth. I pulled out my phone, my fingers flying across the keyboard. Eleanor Vance, missing heiress. The search results flooded the screen, a torrent of old news articles and society blog posts. One headline, faded and from decades ago, screamed, "Vance family devastated. Infant daughter Eleanor vanishes." The accompanying photo, grainy but clear enough, showed a grieving couple, their faces etched with despair. My heart hammered against my ribs. Then I saw it. An older article, a retrospective on the Vance family legacy, mentioned a specific family heirloom. The Vance locket, it read, a delicate silver piece, adorned with a single sapphire, passed down through generations to the firstborn daughter. My breath hitched. The locket I'd found in the dusty metal box, nestled beside the birth certificate, was identical. The sapphire glinted dully even in the dim bathroom light, a silent, damning witness. It was too much to be coincidence. The birth name, the hospital, the missing heiress, the locket, and now Agnes's revelation about the Blackwoods' inquiries at the orphanage. A cold dread, far deeper than any humiliation I'd ever felt, began to spread through me. I was Eleanor Vance. The realization hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. The orphan, the charity case, the one constantly reminded of her humble origins by the very people who had, it seemed, orchestrated her disappearance from her true identity. A wave of nausea washed over me, followed by a searing, white-hot anger. 5 years. 5 years of biting my tongue, enduring their condescension, listening to Eleanor Blackwood's thinly veiled insults about my lack of breeding, while all along they knew. They knew who I was, and they had kept me in the dark, trapped in a life of emotional servitude. I scrolled through more articles, my eyes burning. The Vance family fortune. It was immense, a sprawling empire built on real estate and tech investments. The articles detailed the extensive search for Eleanor, the rewards offered, the family's grief, and then the legal battles. With no direct heir, the fortune, or significant portions of it, would pass to distant relatives or be managed by trusted legal entities. A name jumped out at me from an old legal brief about the Vance estate's administration. Blackwood and Associates, Legal Counsel. Robert Blackwood's family law firm, my father-in-law. My vision blurred, not from tears, but from the sheer magnitude of their deceit. They weren't just distant relatives, they were the administrators of the very fortune that should have been mine. My mind raced, connecting every slight, every patronizing remark. Eleanor Blackwood's constant harping on the importance of family legacy and preserving what is rightfully ours. Robert's casual remarks about managing complex estates. Mark's distant, almost uncomfortable silence whenever his parents denigrated my past. It wasn't just snobbery, it was a calculated campaign of psychological abuse, designed to keep me small, to keep me believing I was nothing more than a grateful orphan who had lucked into a wealthy marriage. They had kept me under their thumb, dependent, compliant, while they siphoned off what was rightfully mine, or planned to. The thought of confronting them made my stomach clench, but the anger was a roaring fire now, consuming the fear. I wouldn't let them get away with this. I gathered the birth certificate and the locket, tucking them deep into my pocket like precious, dangerous weapons. I needed more proof. I needed to know the full extent of their treachery. I knew Mark often left his laptop open in his study, sometimes even unlocked, a habit I usually found irritatingly careless. Tonight it was a lifeline. I crept out of the bathroom, listening. The house was quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator. Mark was likely in the living room, absorbed in one of his endless sports games. I moved stealthily, a ghost in my own home, towards his study. The door was ajar. Inside, the screen glowed faintly. I approached cautiously, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. There it was, his laptop, open on the desk, and on the screen a message application clearly visible. It was from his mother, Eleanor Blackwood. My breath hitched as I read the words, cold and clinical, yet dripping with a venomous triumph that turned my blood to ice. The papers are almost ready. She still suspects nothing. Soon, the Vance estate will be ours. The phrase, the papers are almost ready. She still suspects nothing. Soon, the Vance estate will be ours. Burned into my mind like a brand. It wasn't just a message, it was a confession. A blueprint of betrayal laid bare on Mark's glowing laptop screen. The quiet hum of the house, usually a comfort, now felt like a sinister countdown. My hands, still shaking, instinctively closed the laptop, as if shutting it could unsee the words, unhear the truth. but the truth was already inside me, a cold, hard knot of fury and heartbreak. Years of subtle slights, veiled insults about my orphan status, the constant, grinding reminder that I was somehow less, all clicked into place. They hadn't just looked down on me, they had hidden me. They had stolen my identity, my birthright, and had been living a lie while I, their unwitting pawn, suffered their casual cruelty. The thought made my stomach churn with a sickening mix of rage and disbelief. Mark, my husband, the man I had loved, shared my life with, had known. He had known, or at least suspected, and had chosen his family's greed over my very existence. I found him in his study, pretending to read a book, his face obscured by the dim light. The air between us was thick with unspoken accusations, a suffocating silence that pressed down on me. I held the crumpled birth certificate in my hand, its yellowed edges feeling sharper than any blade. "Mark," my voice was barely a whisper, raw and trembling. "Who is Eleanor Vance?" His head snapped up, his eyes wide with a flicker of panic before settling into a familiar mask of indifference. "What are you talking about, Sarah?" he asked, his voice too calm, too practiced. I slammed the birth certificate onto his desk. "Don't lie to me. I found this. And I found the locket. And I found the message from your mother on your laptop. The Vance estate, Mark? My estate?" His composure shattered. He paled, his gaze darting from the document to my face, then to the floor. "Sarah, please, let's talk about this calmly. It's not what you think." His words were hollow, desperate. "Oh, I think it's exactly what I think," I retorted, my voice rising, the years of suppressed anger finally breaking free. "You knew, didn't you? All those years, all those insults while you watched me struggle believing I had nothing, while I had everything, and you helped them hide it." He stammered, his excuses a pathetic jumble of family pressure and just trying to protect you. Protect me? From my own identity? The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. He admitted to knowing about the potential connection, about his mother's research into the Vance family a decade ago, but claimed he never fully grasped the extent of their plan. He said he was caught in the middle, a weak, cowardly excuse that solidified my disgust. He was a complicit participant, not an innocent bystander. The heartbreak was immense, a physical ache in my chest, but it was quickly overshadowed by a fierce, unyielding resolve. My marriage, I realized, was already a hollow shell. I didn't wait for his pathetic apologies. I left him there, a broken man, and immediately called my in-laws, Eleanor and Robert. My voice was eerily calm, almost detached, as I invited them for an urgent family discussion that evening. They, ever the picture of poised superiority, agreed, undoubtedly believing I was about to confess some minor transgression or seek their guidance on a trivial matter. They arrived promptly, their usual air of condescending elegance filling my living room. Eleanor, in her perfectly tailored suit, and Robert, with his practiced, dismissive smile. Mark sat beside them, a ghost of a man, avoiding my gaze. The tension was palpable, a live wire humming beneath the surface of polite pleasantries. "Thank you for coming," I began, my voice steady, though my heart hammered against my ribs. "There's something important we need to discuss." I didn't waste time. I pulled out the birth certificate, the faded photograph, and the locket, placing them carefully on the coffee table between us. Eleanor's eyes, usually sharp and calculating, widened almost imperceptibly as she saw the documents. Robert, ever the stoic, maintained his poker face, but I saw a muscle twitch in his jaw. "What is this, Sarah?" Eleanor asked, her voice laced with feigned confusion. "More of your silly orphan fantasies?" "No," I said, my voice gaining strength. "This is my past, my real past. Eleanor Vance." I watched their faces, the subtle shifts, the dawning horror behind their carefully constructed masks. Robert scoffed, a dismissive sound. "This is ridiculous, Sarah. You're imagining things. You've always been prone to flights of fancy." Eleanor chimed in, her tone dripping with false concern. "Dear, perhaps you're overworked. Stress can do strange things to the mind." The gaslighting was immediate, a desperate attempt to invalidate my sanity, but I was ready. "Is it fancy, Eleanor?" I pressed, picking up the locket, "that this locket, identical to the one described in the Vance family history, was found with my original birth certificate, listing my birth parents as Evelyn and Thomas Vance. Their denial faltered. Eleanor's perfect posture slumped slightly. Robert's eyes narrowed, a cold glint appearing in them. "And is it fancy?" I continued, my gaze sweeping over Mark, who flinched. "That your son's laptop contained a message from you, Mother, discussing how the papers are almost ready, and the Vance estate will be ours." The words hung in the air, heavy with accusation. Eleanor gasped, and Robert finally lost his composure, slamming his fist on the armrest of his chair. "How dare you snoop, girl?" he bellowed, his voice losing its polished edge. "How dare you?" I countered, standing, my anger giving me a strength I didn't know I possessed. "How dare you steal my life, my inheritance, my identity? You knew, didn't you? All these years you knew who I was and you kept it from me, for your own greed." Eleanor, finally cornered, broke down, not in remorse but in a twisted, self-serving justification. "We found out years ago, Sarah, after the Vance family started their public search for Eleanor. We realized who you were, but it was too late. The family fortunes were already in disarray, tied up in trusts that would have gone to distant, undeserving relatives. We were protecting the legacy. We were protecting Mark. It was for the family." Her voice was shrill, desperate, trying to paint their monumental betrayal as a noble act. Robert, regaining some of his icy control, interjected, "We were going to make sure the estate stayed in the hands of those who truly deserved it. We had legal documents prepared, proving your mental instability, a preemptive measure, just in case you ever stumbled upon the truth." The chill that ran down my spine had nothing to do with fear. It was the cold, hard realization of the depth of their depravity. They hadn't just hidden the truth, they had actively plotted my disinheritance, prepared to destroy my reputation and my sanity to secure their ill-gotten gains. "You won't get a penny, Sarah," Eleanor hissed, her eyes blazing with a hatred so raw it almost made me flinch. "If you pursue this, we have connections. Powerful connections. Will make sure you disappear, not just from the public eye, but from existence. You'll be a forgotten orphan once more, only this time truly alone." The cold threat from Robert Blackwood hung in the air, thick and suffocating. "You pursue this, Sarah, and we will destroy you, make you disappear." Eleanor's eyes, usually so calculating, held a glint of genuine malice. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror, but beneath it, a new, searing heat began to build, pure, unadulterated fury. They had not only stolen my identity and inheritance, but had the audacity to threaten my very existence. The fear was still there, a chill down my spine, but it was now overshadowed by a fierce, protective instinct. I wouldn't let them win, not after everything. I left their house that night, not running, but walking with a strange, deliberate calm, the weight of their words a constant pressure. Mark had tried to stop me, his face pale and contorted with a pathetic mix of fear and shame. "Sarah, please don't do this. They'll ruin us." I looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw a man I no longer recognized, if I ever truly had. The love I thought we shared had been a fragile illusion, shattered by his complicity. I walked away without a word, the silence between us deafening. My first call was to Emily, who listened with a mix of horror and righteous anger. She immediately connected me with a sharp, tenacious lawyer, specializing in complex inheritance cases, a woman named Miss Hayes. Her office was a stark contrast to the opulence of the Blackwood estate, but her gaze was just as piercing, and her questions were precise, cutting through my jumbled emotions. When I laid out the birth certificate, the locket, the fragmented adoption papers, and the chilling messages from Eleanor to Mark, her expression hardened. "This isn't just about inheritance, Sarah," she said, her voice low. "This is a kidnapping, a decades-long conspiracy. The Vance family has been searching for their lost heiress for a very long time." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. Eleanor Vance, that was me. The legal battle began swiftly, a maelstrom of paperwork, depositions, and public scrutiny. The Blackwoods, true to their word, launched a brutal counteroffensive. Whispers started circulating in the elite circles they frequented that I was delusional, a gold digger fabricating a story for fame and fortune. Old acquaintances from my orphan days were subtly contacted, their memories manipulated. It felt like being caught in a spider web, every strand designed to trap and discredit me. But Miss Hayes was a formidable ally. She systematically dismantled their lies, one by one. She unearthed financial records that showed suspicious transfers of funds from the Vance estate to various Blackwood accounts over the years, disguised as administrative fees and investment management. The sheer scale of their deceit was staggering. They weren't just trying to steal, they had been bleeding the Vance fortune dry for decades. The day Mark was called to testify was a turning point. He looked gaunt, haunted, caught between the crushing weight of his family's expectations and the stark reality of the law. Miss Hayes, with a quiet intensity, presented him with the encrypted messages between him and his mother, detailing the final steps of their plot. The courtroom was silent, every eye on him. He stammered, tried to deflect, but the evidence was overwhelming. Then, something in him seemed to break. He confessed, his voice barely a whisper, admitting he had known fragments of the truth, that his mother had confided in him about a family secret years ago, promising him a share if he stayed silent. He didn't know the full extent, he claimed, but he corroborated the Blackwoods' knowledge of my true identity and their concerted effort to keep it hidden. His testimony, though reluctant and self-serving, was a devastating blow to his parents' defense. The mask of respectability they had worn for so long began to crack. The climax arrived on the final day of testimony. I sat in the witness stand, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. Miss Hayes guided me through my story. From the attic discovery to the chilling realization, I held up the yellowed birth certificate, the faded photograph of my birth mother, and the small silver locket, now polished, a tangible link to a past they had tried to erase. The former orphanage employee, now frail but resolute, recounted the Blackwoods' suspicious inquiries and the anonymous donation. Then, Miss Hayes played the recordings of Eleanor and Robert, extracted from a recovered hard drive Mark, in a moment of desperate clarity, had provided. Their voices, cold and calculating, discussing Eleanor Vance and the inheritance, echoed through the silent courtroom. The judge's gavel struck, a sound of finality. The verdict was clear. I was Eleanor Vance, the rightful heiress. The Blackwoods were found guilty of fraud, conspiracy, and facing additional charges related to the Vance estate's misappropriation. Robert and Eleanor Blackwood, stripped of their power and prestige, were led away, their faces a mask of disbelief and impotent rage. I had won. But as I looked at Mark, standing alone in the gallery, his face devoid of color, the victory felt hollow. The cheers of my new legal team, the relief on Miss Hayes's face, it all washed over me without truly touching me. I had reclaimed my identity, my fortune, but the cost was profound. What kind of life was I walking into now, built on the ashes of such a devastating betrayal? The courtroom emptied, leaving behind only the hushed echoes of a life irrevocably altered. Eleanor and Robert Blackwood, stripped of their carefully constructed facade, faced the full weight of the law, charges of fraud, conspiracy, and the malicious intent to disinherit were quickly followed by convictions. Their powerful connections, once a shield, crumbled under the weight of irrefutable evidence. The forged documents, my birth certificate, the locket, the former orphanage employee's brave testimony, and Mark's own confession, given in a desperate plea bargain that ultimately did little to save him. They were sentenced to substantial prison terms, their names synonymous with the greed that had consumed them. The Vance family fortune, once their illicit prize, was finally and unequivocally mine. Mark, my husband, he stood by the defense table, a hollow shell of the man I thought I knew. His remorse, when he finally expressed it, felt like a desperate attempt to salvage something, anything, from the wreckage. He admitted to knowing about their plan for years, though he claimed he never fully understood the depth of their malice until the evidence laid bare in court. He spoke of being caught between his family's demands and a growing unease, but his passivity, his silence, had been complicity. The chasm between us was too deep, too wide to ever bridge. Our divorce was swift and mercifully clean. There were no tears, only a profound sense of finality. It was not just the end of a marriage, but the severing of the last thread connecting me to a life built on a lie. The days and weeks that followed were a blur of legalities, financial briefings, and an overwhelming sense of unreality. I was Eleanor Vance, the long-lost heiress, a name that felt both foreign and intimately mine. Yet I chose to keep Sarah as my everyday name. It was the name I had built a life with, the name that had endured, fought, and survived. Eleanor was my birthright, my past reclaimed, but Sarah was my identity forged in fire. The healing was not immediate. Years of emotional abuse, of being belittled and made to feel worthless, had left scars far deeper than any physical wound. I sought therapy, finding a compassionate woman who helped me untangle the knots of self-doubt and betrayal. We worked through the gaslighting, the insidious ways my in-laws had undermined my confidence, making me question my own perceptions. I learned that their scorn was never about me, but about their own avarice, a twisted reflection of their insecurities. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to trust again. First myself, then a small circle of genuine friends who saw me, truly saw me, for who I was, not for my past or my newfound wealth. The Vance estate was immense, a sprawling legacy of businesses, properties, and investments. It was overwhelming, but I was determined to manage it with purpose. I established the Eleanor Vance Foundation, dedicated to supporting orphans and, crucially, investigating suspicious adoptions and family disappearances. I wanted to ensure that no child would ever experience the deliberate obfuscation of their identity, the cruel deception that had marked my early life. It was a way to turn my trauma into something meaningful, to create a legacy of truth where there had been only lies. I left the Blackwood house, selling it and severing every tangible link to that painful chapter. I found a new home, a quiet place overlooking the Puget Sound, where the vastness of the water mirrored the new expanse of my future. It was a space where I could breathe, where every corner didn't hold a memory of betrayal. I reconnected with distant relatives of the original Vance family, finding a surprising warmth and acceptance. They were strangers, yet they offered a sense of belonging, a connection to a history I was finally allowed to claim. My life was no longer defined by the shadows of my past or the expectations of others. I was no longer the quiet, insecure orphan. I was a woman who had faced unimaginable betrayal and emerged stronger, clearer, and fiercely independent. I had reclaimed my identity, not just in legal terms, but in the deepest sense of who I was meant to be. The journey had been arduous, fraught with fear and heartbreak, but it had led me here, to a place of profound peace and unwavering purpose. I had lost a husband and a family I thought I had, but I had gained myself, a fortune, and the power to make a difference. The night outside was dark, but the lights of my new life were burning brightly. There was still so much to learn, so much to do, but for the first time, I felt truly free. And the most beautiful part? It was just the beginning.